should you not be making a remake or a make or a remake from a book, a make of a book, and or a remake of a movie?
When you don't know what you're doing, there's such a thing as this whole cultural appropriation thing, or basically just if you don't know anything about it, don't make anything about it.
Yeah.
I would also say historically, if you don't know what you're doing,
or if you're not going to be doing what you're saying you're going to be doing,
we have an ulterior motive.
Ulterior motive, yes.
Mm-hmm. Why are you doing it?
Yeah. if the reason you're doing it is not genuine enough.
Mm-hmm. Why not something else? Why not something that is more genuine to that filmmaker?
Yeah. And then if you do it disingenuously,
mm-hmm.
what happens?
Well, pretty much all the remakes of all the 1980s properties have been done badly. And they can be saved by then putting a good writer staff on it and then creating something good. But you might as well just have said, let's make something new. Battlestar Galactica.
21 Jump Street.
21, yeah, but they didn't do it right.
They did something completely different.
Yeah.
So they just took the name of Battlestar Galactica and 21 Jump Street and just did their own thing.
Yeah.
Which is very disingenuous to the people who actually like the original.
Yeah, we don't like that.
There's
MacGyver, the 2015 series. They changed so much that they lost pretty much the fans, but they did a good job of making a show, so they got new fans. Then you're like, but this is over and over the same. This happens over and over again. So why even take the old franchise? I know that you want to get the people in because it's got a name, etc. But you're not delivering on that name.
Well, it's going to be a question of money. You can go to a bank and say, I'm going to make a new MacGyver because there's people who like the old MacGyver.
And it had 20 million viewers.
Yeah, but you don't. But
in the 80s.
But then the thing is, why are you making your thing? Is to make money. Who gives you your money for, especially a TV show, is not the viewer, it's the advertisers. Whereas in a film, you would say that you get the money from the actual viewer, but all you need to do is get them in the door and bums on seats, and you've taken their money. They don't have to like it. They can complain afterwards, and you still have their money. You don't get their money the second time, but you get their money the first time.
You get different people. So when they remade or whatever, they wanted to do a reboot Star Trek. Why would you reboot Star Trek? The universe is so large in Star Trek. You have so many stories to tell. Don't reboot. But they rebooted in 2009. Casting, more or less no problem. Production, we don't like the shiny lights, thank you very much. But other than that, great, do your thing, make a new set of movies. But the fact that they had to reuse old characters and reboot the old characters, and then you have to go, let's make an alternate timeline. I think that's the only thing that saved that set of movies.
Or killed it.
Well, the thing is, the fans don't like it, but they literally said in their press releases that they're not aiming for the old Star Trek fan, they're aiming to widen their scope and get new fans. Well, basically you're saying, we don't care about our fans. And that's true. And there's a lot of old Star Trek fans that don't like the new movies. Doesn't matter how much you do your best.
Yeah, basically the only thing the old fans would have wanted from the old stuff is more of the same stuff. This is impossible.
Yeah.
And we got some more of the old stuff in
Spock Prime was in there.
No, but the older movies, the 1980 movies and 1990 movies.
But they were proper continuations of that universe.
And we were very happy with that. And of course you age out at some point. But the thing is, you don't have to reuse old things. And if you're going to reuse old things, you have to do it very, very properly, because if you don't, people will get mad, and you get a sense of being screwed over as a fan for, okay, you want our money out of our hand, but you don't care how you get it out of our hand. If you have to cheat to get there.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of lying involved when you say, we're gonna do Star Trek again, we're gonna do Kirk and Spock, it's gonna be great. So what do I think as a fan? Is they're gonna do Kirk and Spock and they're gonna do it great. And then what I get is they destroy the planet Vulcan, and which I will never forgive them for. And they don't give us the old Kirk and Spock because they have changed the timeline. Therefore, this is not the old people that we know.
And they weren't the old people. And they weren't the old people anyway, and they weren't written in the same way. So even at the beginning, before they changed the timeline, those weren't our Spock and our Kirk, because they'd already messed up. Before they even started, they had already messed up the time
at Kirk's birth, yeah.
Yeah, Kirk's birth and some other all these minor details that are very important. They messed them up.
I don't mind them saying, okay, we're gonna do one and we're going to set it in an alternate timeline, so we can do what we want. Now that's honest.
That would be honest.
We can create new stories. Say that to me. Don't say we're going to do it again. It's going to be great.
It's because that's what they're thinking. That's what they're thinking that the fan will go for. That they will get the bums on seat for. And they should by now know. 2009, in 2009 they should have known as well, that there is a limit to what fans will put up with, and the fans would rather have some new characters in new situations, done well, because always you have to do it well. If you mess it up, everybody is annoyed.
Yeah. So both Battlestar Galactica and MacGyver was done with basically spitting at the old show. MacGyver, they had Thornton, that was the commander of sorts. It didn't quite work that way, but anyways, it was MacGyver's boss. When MacGyver
the MacGyver remake, they did at least some of the story. With the Battlestar Galactica remake, they just dumped everything.
No, they didn't, because they made him military, which MacGyver never was.
Yeah.
And then they
but they had
the bad. I mean, it was played by a woman, but whatever. But it was gender bending. I don't mind that. But it was the bad guy. They had to then reel her in at the end of season 1, and now we're gonna go. And the problem with that is that you're taking a beloved character, and then you're saying, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool if that's the bad guy?"
Anything you change is wrong, because in 21 Drum Street they took the name and the idea of what it had been, and they just lost everything else, and then ran with it, and they made something completely different. With Battlestar Galactica, they had the couple of the names on a list which they used and just handed out willingly to people, and the bad guy name, and they ran with that. And in MacGyver, they had like same thing, just one page of information, and just ran with it. And you don't. The fan that liked it in the first place is not amused at this point.
Yeah. So my conclusion is they don't make it for the existing fan. What they're doing is they're saying, the media knows this name, Star Trek, TOS, or MacGyver, or whatever.
21 Jump Street.
Yeah. Mission Impossible did the same thing. They also took the beloved head of the team and made him the bad guy in the first movie, which I'm sure lost all of the Mission Impossible fans, but they didn't care, because they got they got a new fan base who wants to see this set of movies, and they're making, I don't know, number I don't know, 500 now. So financially, clearly it works.
Yeah, but that's disingenuous. It's not doing anything for the property in the first place. And I mean, for no reason. I mean, if you look like Shakespeare took history and completely perverted it towards his time and the people who were in power when he was doing stuff. But at least you can understand that it's political.
Yeah.
And when he went back further in time, the more genuine the history that he, as given to him, he would put on stage. The closer to himself, the more politically charged it is. I understand that. This has no reason. Mm-hmm. You have, other than, we have a franchise that was in the 80s and the 90s was interesting for 21 Jump Street, Battlestar Galactica, MacGyver, all these things, Knight Rider, pick something, Charlie's Angels, all these things. And we can take that to the bank and get a lot of money to do a remake.
And they do. And then half the fans say no thanks, and the other half goes, okay, I'll go along with it and watch it. And they get new fans.
They mostly get new fans because for especially something like Battlestar Galactica, who had a complete world of belief system, which was important. It wasn't very prominent, but it was very important.
They were warriors. They were not American military in space.
Yeah, but all of that went out of the window in the first episode. Yeah. I did not even finish out the first episode. I was gone.
Oh, yeah, I was gone as well. And then a few years later, I started watching the show, and it's actually a really, really good show.
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with Galactica.
Zero. It has zero to do with the original Battlestar Galactica, and that's why I was like, why don't you just make that good show that you obviously can make that is all new?
Call it Battlestar Andromeda.
Yeah.
Or
say it's a different Battlestar that got away.
Yeah.
And they are going through there. So that's the thing with Star Trek. They not those reboot movies, but they make stuff in that universe. Doctor Who, they just go on. They make new stuff, and if there is a brush with the old stuff, then it still works within the timeline.
Yeah.
That's why is fascination with rebooting?
If in Doctor Who they have so much property, and Star Trek should have enough property within themselves that they say, we want to do a story with creepy aliens. We can get out Silurians in Doctor Who, or we can get out the Romulans or the Klingons in Star Trek and make another movie. And you can make so many really good movies. In sci-fi there are so many plots you can still do. And you can introduce new characters. I mean, you had Wesley Crusher, who was young. He gets older, and they marry. They have children. In the Star Trek universe, this is perfectly normal that you get generation upon generation. We haven't done it much, but in the Star Trek universe, people have been son and daughter of somebody. There's been familial connections. So starting a show or a film that says this is the grandson of Picard or a grandson of
the Picard series is doing a good job with that, because they can basically say everyone has aged the way they have aged, which is great.
Yeah, now
so
you can
the entirety
actually use
of the Next Generation cast, Voyager cast, and the Deep Space Nine cast can be used in the Picard show if you want to write them into there, and they wrote 7 of 9 in, and that's just perfect.
Yeah,
I love it.
And that's the way to do it. And if you want to start a new thing in the same universe, or even if you wanted to restart Charlie's Angels is pretty forgiving actually for starting new people in it.
The thing is, all
MacGyver,
but that's also fairly forgiving.
MacGyver could be very forgiving as well. He gets older. You would ask the original actor to play that, but he would probably say no because he's retired.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they could have made him, instead of a reboot MacGyver, they could have made him a nephew.
Yeah.
Even 1 or 2 generations down, depending on how young he is. And I I was watching the entire first season going, why is he not just his nephew? Because they changed practically everything. So he is a different person. And he lives in a different era. And
he has a different speciality.
He served in Afghanistan. Well, of course the original MacGyver never served in Afghanistan. He was too young for Vietnam, and there was no other thing to send him to until 9/11.
And the MacGyver might not have gone or not gone in an active gun-toting role, whereas nephew MacGyver, he
could go do anything, and he was
because
he
he's
was a
the
bomb
nephew
disposal unit, and that's perfectly correct. That's great. The side characters were all completely messed up. The Jack Dalton character, I mean, I don't have to go through all of them, but it's basically
and if
there's no need to reuse names and then completely reinvent the character.
Yeah,
just get your character in, give him a new name.
And it's a frustration maybe because it's actually pretty close to the name list. They stuck to roughly to a foundation situation with a MacGyver type person who is called MacGyver, and there's a Dawson, Doc Dalton kind of person, except that he isn't, and that's where
totally incorrect.
But that is where your frustration comes from, because they are close, but
grab
not
the name, and there's no comparison at all.
Whereas in the Battlestar Galactica.
They grabbed all the names.
You grabbed all the names, but the moment you start seeing the show, you know they're absolutely not anywhere, not even in the ballpark.
Yeah.
So the frustration of having a close but no cigar is not there.
Yeah.
The frustration of having names used in places where they don't belong at all is there.
Yeah.
But it is a different frustration.
Yeah.
And this with the 21 Jump Street as well.
Yeah, all of these could have been solved if you say we set it in that universe and we accept that this has happened in that universe, and now these characters, which is like the way Star Trek does it, is the way Doctor Who does it, and those are franchises that actually work.
Yeah. So
basically, don't reboot, expand your franchise.
And especially things like the superhero franchise, where we have like two different ways that Spiderman was introduced. The second time it didn't work because we'd had a origin story already. The amount of times that Batman has been introduced, it's starting to get ridiculous, and it's annoying us. And it's the reboot effect. But it's not. They don't think it's a reboot. They think it's a new start of the same thing. But it's actually a reboot. And you've already done this story, and it's already readily available. Everybody's seen it, and to the point that Marvel realized it, and in the Tom Holland Spider-Man simply didn't do the origin story. Very smart move, because we've seen it so many times, and the only thing you can do is actually mess it up. You can't even do it right anymore. You can only mess it up, because it's going to be different in certain ways from the original, from the first version, which is people think is the original, or at least some.
And you know that there's an original, even if you say no, but it comes from the comics. No, the films have an original. The Christopher Reeves Superman is Superman. Yeah. And everything that came after.
And if you try to redo it, you get a reboot effect. And it's going to get compared to the original, and anywhere where it falls short is going to be criticized, and anywhere where it possibly is better, it's not. People are not going to see it.
The DC series, The Flash, they had a nice solution, because there was also a Flash series in the 90s, and the actor who played him in the 90s is actually in the new show as one of the multiverse Flashes.
Well, that's smart.
And he has the old suit, and they made huge storylines about it. And that I love. That is great. And they also had Mark Hamill, who played the Joker in that. They had him show up. Not the Joker. Is it in Flash the Joker, or is it the Toyman? We'll put it under there if
I'll look it up.
Right. But anyway, it's Mark Hamill, and he was in there.
So they had him come back,
and they had him come back as that.
Yeah,
and that is basically, you're now continuing. And that is much better than
and also
saying we're doing it over again.
Even if you're not continuing, because you are the new Flash is a different Flash. So but because of the multiverse, we can have more Flashes.
Yeah.
What it does is at least shows to the audience, by having Mark Hamill show up and the old Flash show up, is that you realize that there is an issue here and that you did something to at least soften the blow.
Yeah.
And you did something.
With also DC for Supergirl, that has now that they finished their 6 seasons and they stopped. But when it started, they used the actor who plays Clark in The Adventures of Lois and Clark back in the 90s. So they used that actor. There are other reasons that they had to write him out of the story, but the fact that he shows up and that kind of like then you're going, yes, he played the adoptive dad or something like that of the Supergirl character of Kara. They did a similar thing in Smallville, because again now you're looking at it's kind of a reboot because we're now pre everything that we have seen of Clark. And so they asked the woman who played Lana Lang in the original movies to play his mom. And that kind of stuff is then you're saying to the audience, we hear you, we see you, we are taking this seriously. We're not going to do it over, do a thin version over again. We're putting this here, and we're taking this seriously.
And even if we can't do or can't even fit to the other one, we have understood that there is another one, that these previous things have existed and that they are valuable.
There's a different type of reboot that isn't quite a reboot. Do you remember watching the miniseries Scarlet? Based on Gone with the Wind.
Gone with the Wind continuation, 1990s.
A novel came out. It took the world by storm, as did the original Gone with the Wind novel. They immediately wanted to make something big. It couldn't be a movie, so they made a miniseries. This was in the 90s. They cast Dalton. Timothy Dalton.
As Rhett.
As Rhett Butler, which is odd, but I suppose not as... I mean, just as odd as Scarlet being a British actress, so why not? But you never hear anybody talk about it anymore. It's literally... People will still watch Gone with the Wind, but nobody remembers this Scarlet series.
I think one of the reasons is that the people had been waiting for that book since the original book came out in 36, I believe. 36 book. The original book came out in 39. They had the movie. So that went fast and fast. The writer of the book, Margaret Mitchell, from the top of my head, only ever wrote the one thing, and everybody was on her case to write the sequel, and she never did.
Of course, everyone wants a sequel.
We don't know why. I think she probably didn't have a sequel in her head.
She died fairly quickly
She
after
died also, but I don't think she had anything in her head to write a sequel with. So in that 90s book was that sequel that people had been waiting for 50 years. And so the pressure was high. One of the things that Timothy Dalton was a good choice, because you need a very strong character for Rhett Butler, and you didn't have Clark Gable in the 90s anymore. You have to go with
what are you
gonna do? and even in the 30s they were very happy to have Clark Gable. When they start that movie, they knew for a fact Clark Gable was going to be Rhett Butler, and Leslie Howard was going to be Ashley Wilkes, and
which was also a Brit.
And which was also Brit, because these were hard to cast, but they were so obvious. These two people had to play them, and the search for Scarlet was they ended up having somebody who was completely unrelated to Hollywood. She was new.
Yeah. And the Brit.
And the Brits.
That's what I'm saying.
But the remake, with Timothy Dalton, they had this a wonderful strong person, which they needed, because the story, it's not as good as the original. there's a reason why Margaret Mitchell didn't have a follow-up to it. It was very hard to follow up on. But the guy who played Ashley Wilkes in that is so...
It was no Leslie Howard.
It's no Leslie Howard. And you need a really good...
It's a really punishingly difficult role. Because effectively you're playing a male actor is playing a weak man. And the weak man has to be the love of her life, effectively.
Yeah, you have to understand.
And that is so hard. It is an almost impossible role.
Yeah, you have to believably to believe that young Scarlet would fall in love with Ashley Wilkes, and being as weak as he is, and that's And making a remake, because it's not a remake, but
it's not a remake, and it's a continuation.
But still, it's going to get compared. Because Timothy Dalton is going to get compared to Clark Gable.
Nobody's going to match up.
You can't.
Not even.
Even if they were equal in actual fact, the difference in time, the 40 years of difference, has matured Clark Gable as Rhett Butler to such a point that nobody could outmatch that or match it, even come close. So, and you're asking for it by doing this. I mean, they. I do understand they did this thing not as a movie; they did it as a TV
time, which
series.
I really appreciate. Yes.
But they also realized they couldn't compete with the movie, so they didn't. So they went for a TV series, and I think for that they got their probably got their money's worth out of that in advertising and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I don't think they went belly up on it. So that was a good choice to do if you're because doing a remake or continuation of a movie into another medium like a TV series, that I understand, because now you have, and I think it was like 4 times an hour and a half, which sort of went differently in our television, but something like that. I mean, so
it was
4 times an hour and a half.
Amount of time.
4 times an hour and a half is 6 hours, whereas the original movie is 4 hours. Yeah. So in 6 hours, and the fact that movie in the 1930s is going to move slower than one in the 1990s. So the contents of the 4-hour movie should have been probably 3-hour movie in the 1990s if it had been made in the 1990s. So they have like double time of what a movie could give them, and they could put that to good use. Whether or not they did put it to good use is another story, but I understand. It's a more understandable thing because it was a continuation. It was a different medium. Go to video. Go straight to TV. Is better than going from Star Trek, the original series, to which is
reimagined
75 episodes
timeline.
Going to a reimagined timeline in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I think you're going the wrong way.
I've never been a fan of TV shows. Let's do a movie. Wait, this is TV medium. TV medium is a completely different medium. You get to tell a story up close. You get people right in your face. They don't have the type of budget to constantly wow you with special effects. They would love to, and they try to nowadays. But basically the old stuff, they didn't have that kind of budget, so they had to actually entertain you and keep you seated with acting, with interaction with people,
and
with storytelling.
Yeah.
And when you then say, oh, let's put these 4 or 5 seasons, like for instance Starsky and Hutch, they made a movie, and I've mentioned it on this channel before, that sucked. There were people who liked it as a thing into itself because it had nothing to do with the show, and that's the, make a funny movie about cops in the 70s. Fine, just don't call them Starsky and Hutch.
Yeah, and the thing about, and I'm going back to Star Trek because I realized that you take the old Star Trek TOS. These episodes, especially when they didn't have a lot of budget, and they're sort of stuck with just an empty stage and a bunch of lights and maybe a tree or two, and just a bunch of actors, they would write some very serious sci-fi of alien invasion. There's a lot of sci-fi with just a bunch of lights, and if you'd taken the essence of that and stuck that on a movie screen. Mm-hmm. That would have been really good, and I would have forgiven you a lot because you don't have the right actors. But they didn't do that. They just went some space opera on screen. And the same thing with the Starsky and Hutch movie. If you take the Starsky and Hutch, you go sit down with Starsky and Hutch, you watch the whole thing, you try to distill what makes Starsky and Hutch tick, and it isn't the hair or the cardigan or the Huggy. Well, it's Huggy, but not his Huggy's coat. It's Huggy himself. Yeah. It is the way they interact with each other, the way they interact with the world, but also the types of stories that are in their world of murders and mayhem.
Not only that, they actually told very human interest stories,
yes,
because they started to lose budget in season 3, and also they were told that it was too violent. So with season 3 we get these fantastic human interest stories, all sorts of because they never pulled away from the difficult subjects. Yeah. So they had child abuse, they had gay bashing, they had all sorts of stuff going on.
And if they put it in a movie, that would have made an important movie. Now they've made some celluloid garbage.
Because what they did with the Starsky and Hutch movie is they passed it around so many times that by the time somebody actually was now slotted in to actually do it, it was a comedy director. And then
it's not a comedy.
Then you've lost, because it is, and I don't know why they want all these old properties to be comedies. They're not comedies. Have they ever sat down and watched them? I feel like they literally sat down to watch like the intro blips that you see over the tune with the title, and then they stopped watching and they said, "Great, we're going to put that in on the screen, and it's going to be funny." It's like. Starsky and Hutch was not a funny show. No.
Even the funny episodes.
Scenes.
There was some funny. There was a funny episode where they both went undercover as hairdressers. But it had a very serious undertone.
And it was not one of the better episodes.
It's not the better episode, but it was funny. It was funny, but it
wasn't the core of the show. Like Dukes of Hazzard, that is a fun show, and I have to say the remakes and the reboots in the early years, and I've seen a whole bunch of them. I know it's probably not PC to talk about Dukes of Hazzard, but I enjoyed it. They were good. They were fun. They had some continuation stuff with the original actors, and then they made some re-envisioned. Great, yeah,
that's fine,
because it was a happy-go-lucky show. Yeah. So as long as you keep your characters happy-go-lucky, and the thing is, what they did is, because it was in their wheelhouse, they liked happy-go-lucky and they liked comedy. That's a good choice. So don't choose a serious property to do that with. If you choose a serious property, then follow through. And
this is disingenuous if you try to make it into something else. If you if you take a property and try to just make your own thing instead, please don't use the property. Go make your own thing instead. Go to the bank and say I have.
And that's the thing with the Battlestar Galactica reboot. They had an idea of, we want serious battles in space. Okay, what do we need? We need serious armies in space. Okay, let's do that. And then, oh, by the way, it's Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar Galactica was never armies in space. And this Battlestar Galactica was, so, like we said earlier, name it Battlestar Andromeda or whatever. Then it would have worked, because that particular fleeing group of refugees could have been much more militaristic and could have done it that way.
But don't use another property for it. Yeah. And
so I just did a bit on the Four Weddings and a Funeral TV series. Now that's not a movie I would have ever thought that they would make a TV series out of. Just, you don't come up with that idea. Somebody did, and they did a good job.
Yeah, and still staying true to the original.
Well, they augmented. They did more
that's
than the original
fine.
could do,
But,
and then you're doing a good job. They didn't say, "Oh, let's have Charles and let's have Carrie and let's do it again." They said, "This is a story like that."
Yeah, and that's also the core of for Weddings and a Funeral. It could be any man, and every woman could be in this situation, and that's why it's very easy to recast that. But if you say I want to remake Star Trek TOS, then you have to say, do I remake Kirk and Spock? And then I say, don't do that.
No,
how about just another...
In the 80s they said, we want to continue Star Trek. Okay, Star Trek Next Generation. 80 years later, there's practically no possibility of having actors come over. We got some long-lived characters. Let's bring them over. But they are all the right age. They are all supposed to be there.
Basically, it's the perfect remake.
That's how you do things.
It's the perfect reboot is Next Generation for Star Trek. It's smart and you take the core values of the world they live in, continuing them over. I think it's like 70 years later or something like that in their
80 years later. Yeah.
8 years later in their own timeline. So it has evolved. It now we can now also show evolved imagery of what we would like to see on television for entertainment.
That's why prequels don't work in science fiction, because if you decide to do a prequel or an equal, like a reboot, 30 years later, our technology to make science fiction has evolved. So Star Trek Enterprise looked a lot more modern than Star Trek the old series.
And Star Trek Next Generation.
It was 40 years later.
It's actually looked more modern than Next Generation.
Yeah, well, it's 15 to 20 years later.
Exactly, and it shouldn't have. It shouldn't have.
So don't make prequels.
And that's the same thing with the Star Wars prequels. They looked wrong, and I really hated that they looked wrong. They looked too advanced for where they were. And is
that a reboot, or is that a
it's a way of rebooting the show.
Is a prequel a reboot?
Yes.
Which actually, yes, it is. You're just starting a little earlier.
It basically a reboot is any way to reuse the same franchise again. Yeah. But the smartest way is to do a Next Generation. Yeah. It's basically the conclusion.
And then you can use the actors that you have used before. And like I said, The Flash did it very well.
And even if your property starts like 50 years after you've last done something and there's nobody left, you can still say, okay, now we'll be starting our timeline X years later, at least something like that, and we just put it in the story, and maybe just show some of the original footage in the new thing. That also works. To just show, we understand it's there, and we're trying to fit to it as much as we can. Be genuine to it and use it.
Really, it's the intent that you have to look at first.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this? Which is what we said at the beginning of this thing. It's not are you doing it? It's like, but if you're doing it, be clear on why you're doing it and what you want to achieve with it. Whereas they seem to be flinging mud at the wall.
And it just goes...
And then just hope that there's some producer out there that goes, I like that mud. That makes nice tracks. I'll have that.
Yeah. Yeah.
One I liked was Smallville.
Smallville was really good, and they couldn't. I don't think they had any into the 1980 movie, the original movies. Other than they asked somebody, but they had no.
They had Christopher Reeve shows up as he does as in season 2 and 3. He is like a sort of Stephen Hawking character. And that was lovely.
Again, they realized that they are
and they set the limit, right? Because they set the limit at he's never going to fly in this show. This is going to be where he actually becomes Superman, and they kept hard to that. And I think if you set yourself limits, you're actually more creative. Because then you can say, we have to work within this framework. Maybe that's one thing that they're not doing when there's these reboots. They're not setting themselves proper, like, if we're doing this, we should tick this box, that box, and that box.
It has to fit. And
like, you were saying earlier, you have to. What are the things you're aiming for in this thing? What are the things that makes this thing? I heard very good things about the Men from U.N.C.L.E. film. Reboot film.
And I've seen it.
And from Men from U.N.C.L.E. fans.
Yeah, but no.
So, no? Oh.
No, I have seen it. One of the.
I've not seen it.
It's been a while, but I've seen some of the original show, and I've seen this movie. There's also been an in-between movie, which was a TV movie where the actors themselves show up, and it was.
Well, I consider that part of the show.
Yeah, but it's very few people have seen it. So,
I Spy had the same thing. They also made a couple of TV movies.
My biggest problem with the reboot is that the character of Kuryakin, who is played by David McCallum, who is a small Scot, is played by a huge American. I think he's American. I may be wrong on that one, but he's huge. Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't work. It completely distracts you because Kuryakin is small and he always keeps himself small. It's not just that he's small in stature. He keeps himself small. In a room, one of his things is that he's people don't see him. This guy you cannot unsee. He's big. He's huge. And the story was completely forgettable. That doesn't help, of course, if you're going to do a story. Do a good story. And there was other issues. I know there were other issues, but I've forgotten what they were. But this was so distracting. This guy was just huge. And that doesn't work. You need to... I mean, I don't need him to be a blonde Scot because he's supposed to be Russian.
There's only one David McCallum.
There's only one David McCallum.
No point in redoing him.
But there's absolutely no reason, because the show is called Men from U.N.C.L.E. There's been a show called Girl from U.N.C.L.E. They don't have to be Kuryakin and Solo.
Again,
they can be somebody else. They can be the next generation.
Yeah.
Why... And then if you're going to do Kuryakin, get somebody who is very close to it. And if you're going to do Kuryakin. Or don't do Kuryakin. This was bad. So I was not happy.
Okay, I heard other things.
And if the film had made up for it by doing a brilliant story in the right vein, I would have been less of a problem, but it's also didn't do that. Mm-hmm. So there's that. Mm. Yeah, if you're gonna.
Well, what about using the title and just making up the rest?
Yeah, but that's what they did with 21 Jump Street.
Yeah.
And
why did they do that? Why?
They made it again. This 21 Jump Street, just like Starsky and Hutch, it's a very serious show with very serious. Yeah. I mean, we can talk about whether it worked as a show. Was it a good show? Was it laughable? Anything like that. But it was a serious show, and they did some serious stuff. And then they take 21 Jump Street and make it into a silly comedy, a frat comedy with.
Yeah. Well, I ran into a bizarre thing, which is an American book on Dutch culture in the 1840s. Yes, I'm not kidding. And then that was made into a British movie.
Because of course.
It wasn't too bad. We'll talk about that one later. And then there was also that was in the late 70s. Sorry, late 60s even. And then recently there was a Russian movie of nominally the same title. So I watched it because I thought it was going to be about the Netherlands. And it was not. And it was literally, it had half the title, it had 2 ideas of the book, and the rest was all made up.
So it was not just accidentally the same title, it was meant to be...
Yeah.
about the same story. It's just, but more of a.
I suppose half a title is only half a title.
But basically, it's false advertising because they lured you in with the title, and even that it is actually meant for to be from the book. Because the 21 Jump Street is not just they stole the title. They said we're going to do the franchise,
and you have the characters' names and stuff.
That was it because there's 2 male characters in it, and there's 2 male characters in that film.
But they have their names.
I do believe so. Yes.
I think that's the thing. It's just,
but it's false advertising.
Don't use the names. This Russian movie. Okay, so the book is called Hans Brinker and the Silver Skates. Yes, it is the Silver Skates. That wasn't me speaking. And so the Russian movie is called Silver Skates. The Silver Skates.
But he's called Hans.
No, because he's got a Russian name.
He has a Russian name.
Everyone's got, so... No, it's like... And the thing is, it's a fun movie. So, the thing is, just make your own. Just make a skating movie.
Yeah,
don't call it...
It doesn't have to... You don't have to...
And there's no copyright on ideas, so there's no need to reuse a title. There's no need to reuse characters.
All you have to do is make a good movie, and you will get an audience.
Yeah, which is not true.
It is true.
No, it's not true because it won't get the PR.
The reverse is true. If you make a bad movie, people will realize it's a stinker. You may still get the money because people did go and see it if you make enough advertising.
The thing with a lot of these things that we've named, such as Battlestar Galactica, Star Trek reboots, Starsky and Hutch, all of that, is that and this skating thing, is that what they made isn't a stinker. What they made is something else. And I would rather see that something else on its own merit.
Yeah.
And that's my opinion. And I'm sticking to it.
And I can underline that. And I want to see your own crap, not regurgitated crap.
Show us your crap.
your own crap.
Yes. Show us new crap.
Yep.
Is that your opinion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.